The silver wrapping paper caught the light like a blade, and my sister's laughter was the sharp edge that finally cut me loose from the only home I'd ever known. She handed me the box with a smirk, calling it a birthday gift, but everyone in the room knew it was an execution. They expected me to crumble when the truth about my bloodline was broadcast in front of the help and the neighbors. What they didn't realize was that my father had been playing a much longer game than any of us, and by the time the DNA results hit my inbox, a legal trap had already snapped shut around the very people who tried to destroy me. My name is Julian Sterling, and for over 3 decades, I was the invisible man in a house made of polished marble and heavy secrets. I live in Seattle now, a city where the constant rhythm of the rain matches the internal cadence of my own thoughts. I'm a data architect, a man who finds peace in server clusters and encrypted protocols. I like data because it doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't lie to you at dinner parties or whisper behind your back. It is what it is. Growing up in Lake Forest, Illinois, was the exact opposite. Our estate was a fortress of old money symmetry, a sprawling limestone mansion where the grass was trimmed with the same surgical coldness my mother used to curate her social circle. My mother, Evelyn Sterling, didn't just inhabit that house, she orchestrated it. To her, a family wasn't a collection of people. It was a brand that required constant, ruthless maintenance. Every piece of Ming pottery, every guest on the list for the summer gala, and every smile in our annual Christmas card was a strategic placement. I was the child who was always slightly out of focus in those photos. My mother looked at me not with the warmth of a parent, but with a strange, lingering suspicion, as if I were a piece of furniture that didn't quite fit the aesthetic of the room she had spent 40 years perfecting. Then there was my sister, Elena. She was the golden child, the one who inherited the Sterling charisma and the Sterling cruelty in equal measure. Elena didn't walk into a room, she conquered it. People adjusted their posture when she appeared, as if she possessed a gravitational pull that demanded submission. My mother fed that fire, polishing Elena until she shone like a trophy, while I was encouraged to stay in the shadows, to be the quiet background noise that made Elena's brilliance seem more profound. I learned very early that the less space I took up, the fewer reasons they had to be disappointed in me. My father, Arthur, was the only break in the ice. He was a man of immense silence, a titan of industry who spent his life running a global logistics empire, but he saw things the others missed. He didn't hug much, and he rarely spoke about his feelings, but he had this way of standing near me when the house felt too cold. He'd put a heavy hand on my shoulder, a solid anchor point that told me I wasn't crazy for feeling like a stranger in my own home. When he died a year ago, the only person who truly acknowledged my existence vanished, and the house in Lake Forest became a mausoleum of secrets. The funeral was a performance of the highest order. The flowers were so massive they felt suffocating, and the pews were filled with people who knew my father's net worth but couldn't have told you his favorite color. Evelyn was unusually sharp during those days, focusing on the seating arrangements and the quality of the catering as if grief were a project that could be managed with a spreadsheet. Elena was calm, not the calm of someone who is numb, but the calm of someone who has already moved on to the next chapter of a book they've already finished reading. I flew back to Seattle after the burial, desperate to return to my code and my quiet apartment. I tried to forget the way Elena had been whispering into her phone in the hallways of the estate, or the way my mother couldn't quite look me in the eye during the eulogy. I nearly succeeded until Evelyn called me several months later. Her voice had that practiced melodic quality she used when she was about to ask for a favor she expected you to grant. "Julian," she said, stretching my name out like a ribbon. "We're going to have a small, intimate birthday dinner for you at the house, just the family. It's time we were all together again." The words felt wrong. My birthdays had never been productions. Elena's birthdays were month-long celebrations that involved trips to the coast and expensive jewelry. Mine were usually a card with a check and a distracted happy birthday over breakfast.
So when my mother suddenly wanted a formal dinner in Lake Forest, my stomach tightened. I could have made an excuse. I could have told her work was too busy, but two things kept me from hanging up. First, I needed to know what was happening with my father's estate, not because I was greedy, but because in families like mine, information is the only currency that matters. And second, I was tired of being the one who disappeared. I'd spent my whole life trying to be low maintenance, and it had never earned me any peace. Maybe it was time to look the cold in the face. I agreed to go, and when I hung up, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I'd just agreed to walk onto a stage without knowing my lines. As the date approached, that unease grew. A few days before my flight, I received an automated email from a shipping carrier. It wasn't for me, but because I still had access to certain family accounts from when I helped my father with his logistics software, I saw the notification. A package was out for delivery to the Lake Forest estate. The recipient was Elena Sterling. The description was a generic health kit or test. The timing was too neat. It felt like a prop was being delivered for a play I hadn't been invited to rehearse. The Sterling dining room always looked like a magazine shoot that had been frozen in time. Warm, golden light from the chandelier reflected off the polished mahogany. The silverware was lined up like soldiers on parade. Even the air felt curated, scented with expensive candles and wood polish. It should have been welcoming, but it was just a warning. "Don't mess this up," the room seemed to whisper.
My mother was already seated, rotating a glass of wine between her fingers. She took tiny sips, never letting the glass be empty, but never actually drinking. Her smile appeared on cue when I walked in, tight and fragile around the edges. "Happy birthday, Julian," she said, and it landed with the weight of a formality. Elena arrived a moment later, looking radiant in a way that felt aggressive. She air-kissed my cheek and slid into her seat with a confidence that didn't ask for permission. "Julian," she said, her voice dripping with mock affection. "Seattle still treating you simply? You look so grounded." She didn't wait for an answer. She spent the next hour launching into a stream of updates about her life, the remodel of her penthouse, the charity board she joined, the people I didn't know but was expected to be impressed by. My mother laughed in all the right places. I sat there and let the words wash over me, the same way I always had. Be pleasant, be small, don't create friction. But the air in the room was electric with expectation. Everyone was counting the beats until the music dropped. During a lull in Elena's monologue about a private vineyard, I tried to steer the conversation toward the one thing that actually mattered. I kept my voice mild. "I wanted to ask about Dad's estate," I said. "I haven't heard from the lawyers about a final reading. I just need to coordinate my schedule." The room went dead silent. My mother froze, her wine glass hovering an inch from her lips. Her eyes flicked to Elena, a quick, unconscious look that screamed for a cue. Elena's mouth curved into a smile that wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone holding a winning hand and deciding exactly when to lay it down. "You're so worried about that?" Elena asked, her voice sweet as honey. "I'm not worried, I'm just being responsible." "Everything will be handled at the correct time," Elena said. The way she said correct time made my skin crawl. It wasn't an answer, it was a threat. My mother cleared her throat and nodded too quickly. "Yes, dear, we're just not quite ready yet." Dinner continued, but the food tasted like ash. I watched my mother's fingers as they never stopped circling the stem of her glass. She wouldn't look at me. When my mother finally stood up to bring out dessert, I expected a cake that matched the opulence of the room. Instead, she brought out a small store-bought cake that looked like it had been grabbed from a grocery store shelf 10 minutes before the party. It wasn't even on a nice plate. It was a clear signal. The celebration was an afterthought. Before the cake even hit the table, Elena pushed her chair back. "Actually," she said, reaching for a box wrapped in glossy silver paper, "I got you something. A little something to help you find yourself." My mother's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. "Elena," she whispered, a plea that went ignored. Elena slid the box across the mahogany table toward me. It landed with a soft thud. "Go on," she said, leaning in. "Open it. I think it'll answer a lot of questions you've been too polite to ask." I peeled back the silver paper and lifted the lid. Inside was a DNA testing kit. My brain didn't register it at first, not because I didn't know what it was, but because I couldn't believe the sheer public cruelty of the gesture. Alera laughed. It was a soft, sharp sound that cut through the silence of the room. "Maybe this," she said, loud enough for the servers in the hallway to hear, "will finally explain why you're another man's mistake in this family." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because I believed her, but because of the specificity of the insult. You don't say something like that unless you've been rehearsing it. I looked at my mother, expecting her to erupt in anger, to defend me, to tell Elena to leave. But Evelyn just flinched. She looked at the table and whispered Elena's name, a strangled sound that confirmed the truth more effectively than 1,000 DNA tests ever could. They didn't suspect I wasn't Arthur's son. They knew. I did what I've always done. I kept my face steady. I didn't give Elena the scene she was begging for. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just set the lid back on the box and nodded. "Wow," I said quietly. "Happy birthday to me." Elena's eyes narrowed. She was disappointed. She wanted a meltdown. She wanted to see the mistake shatter in front of her. My calm was a denial of her power. I stood up, thanked my mother for the dinner, and excused myself. My mother didn't try to stop me. She didn't follow me. She just sat there with her wine glass, looking like she'd been carved out of salt. Upstairs, my old room felt like a stage set. It was too clean, too sterile. The bed was made with hospital corners, and the shelves were dusted of any personality I had left behind. I sat the DNA kit on the bed and just looked at it. I wanted to leave, to drive to the airport and never look back. But a different instinct took over, a cold, data-driven resolve. If they had brought me here for a reason, then the house was holding the rest of the puzzle. I opened the closet and ran my hand along the top shelf. Most of it was empty, but there was a section where the dust had been smeared. A box had been moved recently. I pulled a chair over, stepped up, and began lifting things down. Old-school notebooks, folders of graded papers, the evidence of a good kid trying to earn a love that wasn't for sale. I found a box of photos, the usual sterling highlights. In every single one, Elena was the center of the frame. My mother's hand was always on her shoulder. My father stood slightly back, and I was always on the periphery, half in and half out, like I was an extra in someone else's movie. Then, at the bottom of a generic moving box, I found a plain white envelope. It looked newer than the papers around it. I slid it out and held it under the desk lamp. Inside was a photograph. It was my mother, much younger, laughing in a way I'd never seen her laugh, with actual joy. A man I didn't recognize had his arm around her. He wore a suit that fit him like a second skin, and he looked at her with a warmth that my father never possessed. I flipped it over. 2 words were written on the back in my mother's handwriting. "Forgive me." My pulse was a heavy thrum in my ears. The photo hadn't been sitting there for 30 years. The dust patterns on the box proved it. Someone had put this here for me to find, or they had been checking to make sure it was still hidden. I took my phone out and photographed everything. The envelope, the handwriting, the photo, the position of the box. I was building a case file now. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that sterile bed and watched the shadows move across the ceiling. I realized that the DNA kit wasn't just a gag gift. It was a tool. If Elena bought it, she could track the results. She could see the status updates. She wanted the proof on record so she could use it to contest my father's will. If I wasn't a Sterling, I wasn't an heir. That was her math. Before the sun came up, I made a decision. I was going to send the test in, but I was going to do it on my terms. I left the house at dawn, saying goodbye to my mother with a polite hug that felt like embracing a statue. Elena watched me from the top of the stairs with a triumphant smirk. She thought she had already won. Back in Seattle, I didn't go home. I went to a shipping center and mailed the kit from a different zip code. I paid in cash. I opened a private P.O. box at a local rental shop. Then I created a burner email address with no identifying information, no names, no birthdays, nothing Elena could guess. I treated the registration of that DNA kit like a high-security data breach. I documented every code, every timestamp, every receipt. Waiting was a slow-motion torture. I went to work, I attended meetings, I coded, but my mind was always in that Lake Forest dining room. I kept a log on my phone of every interaction, date of the dinner, the exact phrasing Elena used, the reaction from my mother, the specific shipping notification I'd seen. I was no longer Julian the son, I was Julian the auditor. When the notification finally hit my burner email on a Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk. My hands didn't shake, they went cold. I logged in and stared at the screen. No biological relationship detected with Arthur Sterling. The words were a clean, surgical strike. Beneath that, the suggested matches appeared. One name stood out: Beaumont. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard it mentioned in our house. It wasn't a family friend or a business associate. It was a ghost. I searched through the funeral photos I'd taken months ago, zooming in on the crowds in the back of the church. I found a small group of people, well-dressed, quiet, standing apart from the Sterling circle. My mother had watched them with a tension that I assumed was just grief. Now it looked like terror. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Elena. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I took screenshots of every page of the results. I saved them to multiple encrypted drives. Then I sent a single message to the family group chat. No words, just the screenshots showing the no relationship result. The response was instantaneous. My phone rang. It was my mother. She wasn't crying. She was hyperventilating. "Julian, please, delete that. You have to delete that right now. Don't do this in front of everyone." "In front of who, Mom?" I asked, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "Elena, the woman who handed me the kit in front of the servants? The woman who called me a mistake?" "You don't understand," she pleaded. "It's complicated. There were agreements. Just delete it, please." I hung up. I didn't need an explanation. I needed a motive. A minute later, a text came from Elena. "Well, now you know. Don't think this changes anything. If anything, it makes it simpler." She was right. It did make it simpler. It meant I owed them nothing. I spent the next 48 hours pulling out every document I'd ever inherited. I found old florist receipts, memorial programs, and an oddly formal note from a law firm in Manhattan that I'd photographed from my mother's purse during the funeral. The name on the firm was Harlan Price. 2 days after the DNA results went live, I got an alert on my burner email, a security notification. Someone had tried to log in from a different device. The location was Lake Forest, Illinois. They were trying to get into my account to see what I knew, or perhaps to delete the evidence themselves. I changed the password to something impossible and enabled two-factor authentication. This wasn't family drama anymore. It was cyber warfare. I hired an attorney named Marcus Thorne. I chose him because his profile was blunt: trust and estate litigation, contested wills, fiduciary disputes. He didn't have a flashy office. He had a room full of books and a mind like a steel trap. I gave him the sequence of events: the funeral, the files Elena mentioned, the birthday invitation, the shipping notification, the dinner, the photo in the closet, the DNA results, the hack attempt. Marcus listened without interrupting. He took notes with a fountain pen that scratched against the paper. When he finished, he leaned back. "Your sister isn't just being mean, Julian. She's trying to disqualify you as a beneficiary. If your father's trusts are structured around biological heirs, she can argue you have no legal claim to the estate." "But my father raised me," I said. "He knew." "Knowing isn't the same as documenting, unless he built a failsafe." I started making calls.
I contacted a neighbor from my childhood, a woman who had always been kind to me. I asked her who visited the house when my father was sick. She remembered Elena's car there every day. I called our old housekeeper, now retired. She remembered Elena hovering whenever a lawyer came by, insisting on being the one to organize the folders. I was building a map of Elena's interference.
Then I got an email from Harlan Price. It was a generic administrative request asking to confirm my mailing address. Marcus told me not to respond directly. "They're checking to see if you're still in Seattle or if you're moving toward the estate," he said. "The timing is too precise. Something is about to break." A week later, the first shot was fired. I received a cease and desist letter from a lawyer named Victor Sloan, representing Elena. It accused me of defamatory statements and demanded I stop sharing unverified allegations about the family. It was a bluff, designed to scare me into silence, but you can't be scared of the truth when you have it in an encrypted folder. Next, my HR department at work called me in. Someone had made an anonymous tip that I was involved in a legal dispute that might affect the company's reputation. They didn't fire me, but the message was clear. My family was willing to burn down my career to keep their secrets safe. I didn't panic. I documented the meeting and sent it to Marcus. Then Marcus called me with news that changed everything. "I just heard from a man named Silas Reed," he said. "He's a private investigator. He says your father hired him 6 months before he passed. He's been waiting for a specific condition to be met before contacting you." "What condition?" I asked. "The use of your parentage as a weapon," Marcus replied. "Your father anticipated this. He knew exactly what Elena would do." Silas Reed had a file, a big one. It contained logs of Elena's meetings with estate lawyers while my father was on his deathbed. It had evidence of unauthorized transfers she'd tried to make, and, most importantly, it had a sealed envelope with my name on it held by Harlan Price in Manhattan. The meeting was set for a Friday. I flew to New York with Marcus. The office of Harlan Price was a cavernous space overlooking the East River. It felt like a cathedral of wealth. My mother was there, looking like she'd aged 10 years in a month. Elena was there with Victor Sloan, looking ready for a fight. Harlan Price didn't waste time. He acknowledged that the meeting had been triggered by my sister's legal filings to disqualify me as an heir. Then he read my father's words. Arthur Sterling had written a notarized statement years earlier. He stated that he was fully aware that I was not his biological son, that he had chosen to claim me anyway, and that any attempt to contest my status as a Sterling would trigger a hostility clause in the will. The heir left the room. Elena's face went from triumphant to ashen. The clause was simple. Any heir who attempted to use biology to alienate another heir would be immediately stripped of their executive powers in the family trust. They would receive a baseline inheritance and nothing more. My father had built a cage for Elena, and she had walked right into it the moment she handed me that DNA kit. Harlan Price handed me the sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Arthur. "Julian," it read, "I saw how they treated you. I saw how she looked at you. I didn't have the words to change it while I was alive, but I have the power to protect you now that I'm gone. You are my son, not because of a test, but because I chose to be your father. Take the authority I've given you and build a life where you never have to be small again." The document also revealed the Beaumont match. It was a man my father had quietly settled with decades ago to ensure I would never be bothered. He hadn't hidden the truth to protect my mother. He had hidden it to protect me from my mother. Elena tried to scream, to call it a fake, to argue that the clause was invalid, but Harlan Price simply pointed to the piles of evidence Silas Reed had gathered, the hack attempts, the HR calls, the intimidation. It wasn't just a dispute, it was a documented campaign of harassment. Victor Sloan whispered to Elena to stay quiet. The war was over. I didn't take their money to be spiteful. I took the control of the trusts because I was the only one who wouldn't use them to hurt people. My mother stayed in Lake Forest, a prisoner of the brand she had built. Elena was sidelined, her influence evaporated by her own greed. I returned to Seattle, but I didn't go back to being the invisible man. I bought a home that I actually wanted, not a museum. I kept the photo of Arthur on my desk. He was a man of logic and logistics, and he had managed the most important delivery of his life with perfect precision. He had delivered me my own life. I realized that being a mistake is just a story someone else tells you when they're afraid of your truth. My father's last nod wasn't just a goodbye, it was an invitation to exist. I'm Julian Sterling. I'm a son. I'm an heir. And for the first time in my life, I'm not asking for permission to be in the room. The rain in Seattle doesn't feel cold anymore. It feels like a clean slate. I've learned that the family you're born into is just a starting point, not a destination. You can find your own blood in the promises people keep and the choices they make. I made a choice to survive, and my father made a choice to make sure I did. I still look at data every day. I still find comfort in the logic of code, but now I know that even in the most chaotic systems, there is a failsafe. You just have to be patient enough to let it trigger. Elena thought she was ending my story. She didn't realize she was just the prologue. Before I leave you today, I want to say something. Telling this story was painful, but it was necessary. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, like you're an afterthought in your own home, please know that your value isn't determined by people who can't see you. Your truth is yours to own. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and it helps me realize how far these stories can reach. And if you've ever had to fight for your own identity, let me know. We're not as alone as we think we are. If you want to hear more stories about truth and boundaries, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It tells me that my story matters. Thank you for listening. My sister thought a DNA test would prove I was a mistake, but it only proved that my father's love was a choice he was willing to defend from beyond the grave. The truth didn't break me. It built the man I was always meant to be. Sometimes the best gift you can receive is the one intended to destroy you, because it's the only thing that finally sets you free.